Yes, here I am, about to display a new outlet for me, going down the rabbit hole with Mr. Page. I thought there wouldn't be a better way to start this kind of show, this kind of maybe mini-series, better than having a conversation with my great friend, great musician, brother, Jack Hues, from the famous band Wang Chung. Jack's been in town, actually playing on a Wang Chung tour, 80s tour, and he said he'd stop by and listen to my brand new album, because Jack actually played guitars on my brand new album a long time back, but we went through COVID and all this crap, and then now I've finished the album, and I thought, I want to play it to Jack, and he's in town, so he came across, but on one condition, that he could wash his clothes at my house. Now, that is bizarre, but he said he's been on the road for a long time, and if he's going to come across, listen to my record and be interviewed by me, I'd have to wash his clothes, which I did. We had a wonderful time together, played my new album to Jack, which he played some incredible guitars on, and he was very moved by it, which was wonderful, and we'll talk about that. But we had a conversation, so this Going Down the Rabbit Hole with Martin Page, the first ever one of these, will be a conversation between me and Jack Hues. You'll hear the washing machine in the background. My gasket is blown, so there will be the washing going on as we talk. But we have an incredible chat together. We talk about Jack's new tour, and we talk about my album and his feedback for it. And we talk about Jack's incredible solo albums. And we talk about an album that he never ever released, which everybody's interested in. Anatomy Lessons, very interesting. We talk about Jack's vision when he's writing. We talk about his jazz work. Does the album mean anything anymore? And does vinyl mean anything? We talk about Jack's musical philosophy as well as mine, and his wilderness years. We talk about a lot of great things. Even Bob Dylan is brought up, and Jack's brand new single called Since 2017. UFOs. Yes, you're going to want to hear that. And Jack writes that song in an alien guitar key of E flat. And you're going to want to hear why he did that. There's a lot we talk about. We have a lot of fun. We're best mates. And so for the brand new mini-series of Going Down the Rabbit Hole with Mr. Page here, let's let the show begin. Here's my conversation with Jack Hues. Well, can you believe it? I've got my best mate with me here today. This is Jack Hues from Wang Chung. In the background, can you hear that? It's his clothes being dried in my house, because he's on the tour, and he said, if I'm going to be interviewed by you, you have to wash my clothes, right?
Yeah, essentially.
I charged him $30. But as you can gather, best mates here. This is my brother. This is Jack Hues from Wang Chung.
It's the most high-tech laundrette I've ever been in.
And we would do the interview while washing your clothes.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really strange stuff.
His beautiful laundrette.
Now, Jack has come across to play with Wang Chung on this new tour. And tell me, Jack, what's it been like in Los Angeles in 2023?
It's been great. I mean, God, what can you say about it? You know, we played the Greek Theatre here, which I love. And that is a sort of institution. A lot of people, great people, have walked on that stage.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, and it sells out pretty much. You know, and the audience response is ecstatic.
So it's been a good tour.
Yeah, it's very good. You know, we at the Greek we played To Live and Die in LA. We don't always get to play that because
what a song!
Yeah,
what a song!
It's a lovely song, and of course, especially touching because Bill Friedkin passed away. August, I forget the date now, August the 8th. It was beginning of August anyway. So, people got into it, I think. You know, sometimes in those 80s things, it's like bam, bam, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, with the hits, you know. So playing To Live and Die is, it gives people a bit of, time for a bit of thought. And a lot of people love that song. So.
And what was the crowd like? Did you have a big crowd?
Yeah, like I say, pretty much sold out. You know, you sort of, when you're on the stage, you can't see. But the response is amazing.
You're a superstar. You're a superstar, but you still bring your clothes across to my house to be washed.
I'm cheap.
There was a question I was going to... that ends the whole show,
It's not like the old days. You can't find a laundrette that easily. on Hollywood Boulevard, and even if you did, I'm not sure you'd want to be sitting in there too long.
On $30. I got to say to Jack here, this is my first question that I had planned. We have written the two worst songs known to humanity and mankind and in the universe. I have written We Built This City, and you have written Everybody Have Fun Tonight. How do you feel about that?
I wish I'd written We Built This City.
Because I'm number one. I'm very proud of that. I think the magazine was Blender, wasn't it? Blender Rolling Stone?
Was it? I don't know. They've fairly discredited all those things.
Yes,
you know
I mean, in a way it's helped us, hasn't it, over the years?
Well, yeah, at least we're in the higher echelons of
Top
bad
five.
taste. As
Top
opposed to
5 of
just
the worst
medium.
songs. It's so good to see Jack. You know, I worked with Jack right back in the 80s, right at the beginning of time, and we just found a friendship and a brotherhood, which is so special. And Jack actually played on my last album, my new album about to come out, played some incredible guitars, and it was a great pleasure to sit down with Jack and play him the album. And for the first time, he's heard his guitars and the songs really finished. And Jack didn't vomit, so I was pleased about that. But I think you had some soulful feelings about the album, didn't you?
I enjoyed it, yeah.
Thank
I
you,
mean,
Jack.
what's great about the record, Martin,
Thank you, Jack.
is that it displays different sides of you. So it's not just one version of Martin, you know. And it particularly the sort of soul funk side. Everything you do is soulful because everything comes from a deep feeling place, you know. But there are some tracks where you just sort of let the tracks roll. Really, you don't get not like me, kind of thousands of sections and chords nobody understands. You know, you just get into a groove. And there's one track in particular. What was that one called? With the one
To Feel?
No. The one before
Your
that.
Whole Heart?
No, the one that sounds...
I'm giving away all the
Prince,
titles here.
The Prince.
Oh, Little Bird.
Little Bird. God,
New Orleans.
That's a smash.
Oh, thank you, Jack.
But it's more than that. It's lovely to hear you showing that side of yourself, you know, which is funked up, which is Sly and the Family Stone. Do you know what I mean? Which is
I grew up on that.
You understand all that.
Yeah.
That language and speak it back.
I can't wait for the audience to hear this album. I've waited a long time to put it out, but it's so beautiful to play it to Jack after all these years, because Jack was the first person who came across to actually play on this record in my house again, and we'd worked again from the 90s and the 80s. So, and this record was started The First and Last Freedom, and I'm telling you the title of the album for the first time. It was started at the time that Jimmy Copley, my drummer, was ill with struggling with cancer. So these songs weren't really written for an album. And so when Jack appeared and just started to play on the record, he encouraged me to think that this album was very special.
Well, they had a sort of cohesive quality, definitely. And I felt, you know, and I'm not just saying this, I felt that it was some of the best writing you've done.
Thank you, Jack.
Really, really amazing. Because there's a simplicity to it, but that doesn't mean simple. It just means directness and clarity. You know,
I appreciate
great
that.
qualities.
And I was nervous to play it to Jack because I respect Jack's music so much. So we had a very special playback, and thankfully he endorsed me as I washed his clothes.
Yes. I couldn't really say I didn't like it.
I think if I washed his clothes, he would enjoy. He would say the album was pretty good.
He just shrink the whole lot of them.
Now I've got to ask you, Jack, because you've made some incredible solo records recently. You've made a record called Primitive in 2020. Electroacoustic Works in 2021. Tell me the stories of those two solo records.
Well, I guess I spent quite a lot of time, 10 years before that almost, experimenting with writing, you know, particularly in working with jazz musicians. And I don't necessarily count myself as a jazz musician. It's a language that you speak almost. It's like having an accent, if you like. I don't quite have the accent, although I love it, and some of my most recent influences have come from that world, you know. And I suppose due to a series of personal things I went through, really to do with loss, I found myself, well, to try and sort of deal with it, I wrote poetry. And I set myself this task of writing a poem every day, however I felt and whatever I was doing, you know. And that created a body of expression. And then I started looking at it as a way to sort of start lyrics, and some songs started to come out. And I don't know whether you experience this, but sometimes, you can go for a few months without writing a song, and then suddenly
Absolutely.
2, 3, 4 start coming out together, and there's a whole flow develops.
Yes.
And with Primitive, it was very much that. A lot of people were saying, "Oh, this must be songs from like the last 20 years," but it wasn't. They were all written within a period of about 3 months, I think. And it's a double album. It begins with "The Look of Love," a Burt Bacharach song, and ends with Lana Del Rey's "Video Games."
Yeah.
Again, I don't know if I was being A&R'd, as they say. They probably would suggest that I put those songs in the middle, but I wanted to be this like a sort of portal. You go through the portal of "The Look of Love," that kind of classic Burt Bacharach writing.
Yeah.
Obviously, I tweak all the chords and I send the song off in this kind of obsessive journey. But for me, it was important to sort of set that tone, kind of, and then my expression comes out of that. And then the Lana Del Rey piece, it's just, periodically I get into songs, I just get obsessed with a certain song, and Video Games is a song I got obsessed with.
Both those albums are just extraordinary and brilliant, and we grew up in that age of listening to Talk and Blue Nile and experimental music, and listening to music that really touched our souls. And I think that when I worked with Jack in the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, I felt like that even though he was working for Wang Chung, that there was something much deeper inside him, and something that was definitely going to come out at one point. And I think with Primitive and Acoustic Works 2021, you have a sound. And nobody can sing like you, nobody has the swing like you, nobody has the funk like you. And it's so good that you are now seeing, I think for the first time, because we were speaking before we did this show, that you see your solo career in front of Wang Chung.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Wang Chung is a successful product, if you like, and I'm still, invested in Wang Chung. It's an important part of my life, and a lot of the songs, well, this is a whole other conversation, isn't it? About how you survive in the music business. But you have to be able to play different parts, different masks. You have to be a good actor, as well as have the sincerity and the drive, as it were, that keeps you going. But yeah, I think Primitive and Electroacoustic Works represent me as a songwriter and as a lyricist, as a musician, in a way that it will be difficult to do within the context of Wang Chung.
Absolutely. And then there's an album here that I've got to ask you about, which it's called Anatomy Lessons.
Oh, yes.
Now, on Wikipedia, it says it wasn't released. Was it recorded?
Yeah, it was completed, in fact. And in fact, you and I wrote half the songs on it.
Oh, did we? Was I there?
Yeah.
Was I washing your clothes?
That was when we first met. Yeah, I used to bring my clothes over. You'd wash them, and I'd play you a few songs, and you'd go, I'll go and make the tea now. And I'd use your gear to finish
So that's
them.
the album. So where is it? Where is it?
Well, this is a good question. Another person was asking me about that yesterday. And
everybody knows about it. So when you know about an album that doesn't come out, it has a mystery about it.
There's a lot of mystery because it hasn't come out for a long time. I recorded it after Wang Chung split, basically in 1990.
Yeah. In LA or in London or all over the place.
Mainly in London, actually. Yeah. With I worked with Nick Davis, who was the guy at the time who was doing all the Genesis remasters.
That's right. Did he do Ice House?
I think he did.
Yeah. Right.
So Nick was a very kind of skilled engineer. And it's a very sort of multi-layered, complex record, But for 1990, it was out of time in the sense that it was probably more prog than some of the stuff I've done more recently.
Which I have to say here is Jack always followed his instincts. You did. Even when we first got together, I was making tea more than I was in the studio because Jack was saying, that's crap, that's a bad idea, that's crap, go and make the tea. Because you always really had a sense of where you were going to be.
I do tend to be, when I'm writing, I get quite a clear sense of how I want things to be, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It's, some people say, if you could give advice to your younger self, what would it be? And my advice would be collaborate more.
That's interesting. Yeah. Because I've done the opposite. I used to collaborate like a maniac, and now I've sort of sucked back into my own.
Yeah, I get that.
My own world. But you feel the opposite to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the jazz experience is all about collaboration. You can't do jazz on your own.
Absolutely. and then I have to ask you about your Jack Hues quartet.
Yes.
Now, I hope I'm saying this right. Epigonal quark?
Epigonal quark.
That didn't work, did it?
Oh, you're reading it off the page there.
I shall wash the clothes. Now, tell me about that record.
Epigonal quark. So back in 2012, I think it was, I was working, the year before that, I was working with this band in Canterbury called Siddhartha. Siddhartha, guys half my age. In fact, some of them were students of mine at the university when I was teaching songwriting. And I was working with them, plus some jazz musicians from London, and a long-time collaborator of mine called Sam Bailey, who's a sort of improvising piano player. He's partly jazz, partly classical, but really into experimental stuff. And this sort of band was sort of got together to do a concert in Canterbury. There was a sort of a thing called Sounds New, which was a sort of concert series in Canterbury. And they commissioned me to do something, which didn't mean I got any money. It just meant that there was a realm to play.
Yep.
So we did this amazing concert. We played a bit of Soft Machine being a Canterbury band from the 70s. Still going. Amazing band.
The Canterbury Sound.
The Canterbury Sound, yeah, very wrapped up in that, or wrapped up, no, not wrapped up, but influenced by it.
Yeah.
And so we did one of their tunes. We did an arrangement of some Stravinsky that I did, and we also did a cover.
Talk.
That came later.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is the early days, but we did this cover of a tune by Beck called Nobody's Fault But My Own.
Right.
And it was very much in the style of Miles Davis circa 1971.
Yeah.
And it went really well, and so well that we decided to record it. So we all got together in this garage in the countryside in Canterbury, and there was a load of musicians.
That sounds fantastic.
It was great, actually. Chris Hughes produced Dance All Days and also produced two of my jazz albums.
Tears for Fears as well.
Tears for Fears, and McCartney, Robert Plant, all those.
Adamant.
Yeah, he was one of the drummers.
Because he's such a rhythm player.
He's a rhythm guy. Yeah, and a lovely, lovely man.
Yeah.
Anyway, he came to this session, sort of produced it, really, and Chris's, just his presence actually always makes me play better, I think, and think better. And I know that I got to come up with the goods. When he's sitting there, I can't just be an idiot.
Yeah.
So
like you are now.
Exactly.
Right? You have to let go of that.
I feel the pressure. So we did this recording, but I think we did like 4 or 5 takes of Nobody's Fault But My Own, which is a kind of essentially a 20-minute jam in F sharp, know. And Chris was there, and then he and I did a bit of editing, the takes together, and we put it out as a sort of 12-inch single in a sense.
How brilliant is that? That's brilliant.
It was really great. It's got some great playing on it. It's
brilliant.
Again, it's the opposite of what we do as 80s players.
Yes.
There's a very loose structure that we're following, but
doing
it's all about listening and all about reacting to the other
Yes.
players and stuff.
Yeah.
And so we put it out, and it got a lot of positive action.
We're talking art here.
We sort of are, I mean, we always are, aren't we?
Yes,
We are. But this is a certain kind of art with some very skilled musicians, And it got sort of taken up by the prog fraternity, and Prog Magazine in particular, who were big fans of Siddhartha, got interested in what I was doing, and this whole sense of me being an 80s pop star, which for a prog person is a bit like persona non grata. Suddenly it was sort of like, you've seen the light a bit, and in fact the Prog Magazine gave me an award.
And I remember the picture. You were wearing a suit with the bow tie.
I was all.
And you don't look like that now.
Very much.
You look like you're in California.
Yeah, I do. I am.
And you've got a suntan.
Sort of.
Which is pretty good. It's what I always felt was great about Jack is that he followed the music from his heart and he stood by it. You have to be brave to do that. And
but like you, there's no other way, really. When you're getting the ideas, it's like, what are you going to do? Sort of like, that's a bit complicated. I bother with that.
But this is interesting, Jack, though. But in the 80s, though, we were quite forced, weren't we? We had our hits.
Yeah.
You had the second worst song ever written in time.
Yes.
And I had the first.
Yes.
And so we were actually forced to follow that philosophy.
Well, it was an interesting time. You know, there's a book, isn't there?
And that's the reason why you came to me.
Yeah.
Because I believe that the producer who did We Built This City, I'm not following my papers here.
Everybody at Fun Tonight.
Yes.
He produced them both. In fact, it's him.
But he sent you to me.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And we were looking for more of the same stuff. And in that period, we were all trying to emulate the same stuff. But I felt that when I was with you, that you were still saying we have to expand. We have to try something different. We have to go forward.
Yeah.
And I'm going to... none of my notes, you can hear rustling here, mean anything. But going back to the first time, before I met Jack, was back in the 80s. I was recording the first Q-Fill record on Arista Records and Jive Records. And my engineer brought me a record... that I thought was outstanding, and it was a song called, and I wanted to ask Jack about this for a long time, Tina Na. And I don't think I'm going to get the name right, but it's Hung Chung or Hang Chung?
Sort of, yeah. In Chinese, you sort of say Wang Chung.
Wang Chung. Okay.
But Wang Chung, yeah, and Wang Chung.
But really, this record to me,
anyway, it's just a different spelling of the same thing, really.
Absolutely knocked me out. And so when my publisher said, "Who do you want to work with in the 80s?" I said Jack Hues from that name.
Chinese guy.
And when Jack came to me, we were both under, I think, the pressure of trying to, at that time, deliver hits.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the things that also bonded Jack and I.
Yeah.
Because when we got together, we realised there was more of an artistic sense hidden inside us, and we were going to try to have hits, but still going to follow our musical ability, right?
Well, I think you're very tuned into that because you were out here in LA as a professional songwriter, not as an artist.
True.
Right.
True.
That is a tough place to be.
Yeah.
You know, I really get that, and I always was slightly in awe of the fact that you managed to not only do it once. You know, you did it loads of times and worked with people like Robbie Robertson and Maurice White and heavyweight people. Do you know what I mean? And you, like me, you're a kid from England. You know, from a sort of little town. Southampton's not so little, but you know, these sort of industrial towns that pepper England. You know, and it's like, you know, how do you get to stand in the studio with Maurice White and say, do that again? You know? There's a great book by David Hepworth called Fabulous Creatures, something like that. No, I don't know what it's called. It's about the album, anyway. He talks
the concept of the album,
It's about the development of it, as a representation of pop music, as opposed to singles.
Yes,
you know? And this whole thing that, like, if you were a kind of, you know, kid in 1967, 68, when Sgt. Pepper was coming out, that was about the most colourful thing in your bedroom.
It was colourful.
The rest, it was like...
Right.
And album covers, Disraeli Gears, I remember seeing the cover to that album.
Yes.
I bought the album because of the cover. I'd read about it, and when I listened to it, I didn't really get it that much, but I mean, I loved it, but yeah, the covers of those albums were portals into another world.
Absolutely.
You know, and they were the beginnings of an education about music that you don't get until you're sort of doing it and working with heavyweight people.
Yes. Yeah. So again, I'm going to jump across some of these questions I've written for the end, but I got to bring up again. Vinyl and the album concept. Does the album exist now?
Yes, it does. It's still, you know, the only people that tell you it doesn't are the people who are selling you music, you know, which are streaming platforms.
Right.
You know. Obviously, in that respect, you know, the album's not a natural fit to that. You know, the single is, or the track that you like on your playlist of other stuff you like, you know. But the thing about the album is, well, straight away, that whole thing of like a playlist of things you like, that's not what an album is. An album is a song, or maybe two songs you like, plus a load of other stuff that you don't like, you know.
Right.
But through the process of listening to it, you come to sort of understand it and like it, and realise that the first two songs are a bit shallow, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
So albums were, again, I keep using this word portal, but they were, you know, a way of accessing sort of more what's the word? It's not interesting, because, you know, everything's interesting, isn't it? But,
even your clothes being washed is interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Deeper stuff. You know, the album for me is the ideal way for an artist to represent themselves into the world, because you get the front end necessarily where you're trying to connect with as wide an audience as possible, and then you have the stuff which is the stuff that comes out of you. You know, that you need people to come to you for. You know. Yeah.
Now
that exchange, isn't
on
there?
your records, your solo records, you've released great vinyl releases. open-edge spread on the vinyl and everything. I mean, it's beautiful artwork.
Yeah, Primitive is a double album, which is something that I always wanted to do. You know, so you could say, well, it's a sort of a long CD sort of thing. But CDs are different. You know, the whole way they're weighted is different in terms of how you organise the content, which tends to be the best in inverted commas track first, and then it just gets progressively more shit. Whereas an album has that whole sense of the first 20 minutes, which concludes with a track that's going to take you into side 2, which might be a more continuous track, and with double albums there's that side 3 thing, what happens there, this kind of netherworld that you're in by then.
Now you have children, they're younger than you. Do they feel the same way because they're dealing with Spotify and iTunes and everything? How do they feel about streaming and the way you're portraying it?
Yeah, they love albums. My son Harry's got a good record player, speakers, and he gets, listening to albums is a whole different experience from the streaming thing. Psychologically it's different. Streaming is all about what's next, whereas the album is, I've got to make time to sit down and listen. And you do that, and it rewards, that process rewards you, I think.
How do you think you have matured over the years?
Like fine wine.
You've got that written down. I can see you looking at it. Fine wine.
I said it somewhere joking.
But I mean, seriously, how do you feel that you've changed? Because when I met you and we started to write in the 80s, you were very single-minded. And you said, no, Page, I don't want to run a ballad here. I don't want to sound like Styx. I don't want to sound like Genesis. I don't like that prog stuff. And yet, over the years, you've changed in the way your philosophy has been. To me, I feel that. Do you think that you have changed since the early days?
Yeah, inevitably, I think. I mean, I was in Book Soup a couple of evenings ago. Book Soup, for
I
those
love
of
the
you
place,
who don't
Ventura.
know. Incredible bookshop, actually on Sunset Boulevard, isn't it?
Beautiful,
And I used to go in there in the 80s.
And the Tower Records.
And the Tower Records opposite.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Which is sadly now a trainer depot, I think. I was sort of looking at the books a couple of days ago, and found myself in the same section that I always used to be in, which is the sort of poetry and classical literature.
Not pornography, no pornography.
That's where I've changed.
I knew you'd changed. I knew it.
You saw right through me.
You're not in the magazines. I knew it.
This foreign magazine.
So where were you?
Oh, it sounds boring now, but I was in the poetry and classical section. I realised it's all getting a bit serious, isn't it? Anyway, this is, when you're talking about change, I sort of thought, actually, maybe I haven't changed. I'm still looking at the same old shit that I looked at
like
40 years ago.
Same with me. Same with me.
But on the other hand, I think the whole experience of, this whole curve that I'm on, this point, on this point on the curve, back when I started, making points on the curve, let's say in Abbey Road with Chris Hues.
Absolutely.
I was a kid. I knew nothing about anything really. I loved music, but I wasn't in deep with it somehow. Do you know what I mean? I was, and that probably shows in the music in some ways. But so if there's change, it's to do with depth. I think in a way it's still the same obsessions, but I think having worked at different levels in the business, in different genres, with different people, and had time to really have a think about things, what's important, what's not, taking the lessons from people like Dylan and Miles Davis.
That's what I found interesting about you, because in the early years when I met you, I think they were there, those influences, but you never really brought them up as much. And if I brought them up, you'd say, it's standard. And I know when I worked with you as a young writer, I thought, Jack is so far ahead of me harmonically that I thought, I wonder if he'll ever understand the simplicity of Knocking on Heaven's Door, or My Sweet Lord, or Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Would he understand that? And somehow over the years that I've worked with you, because we've become brothers and stayed friends, I sense that you've actually got to honour that kind of music and a different kind of appreciation.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I've engaged with it much more.
Yes. I mean, for me to hear Jack Hues say he's playing Dylan's albums for 2 weeks or something was like, he must be on drugs or something. Something's gone wrong. But
no, when we were working together, I was not.
If I'd said Dylan to you when we were working together, you'd
Yeah.
have shot me. You'd have given
Not
me
exactly shot you, but
You'd have walked out.
You've got to respect. You've got to respect.
Don't
the
mention
man,
that name.
But it was kind of like, it's not where I'm
D
at.
to A to G, D to A to G. Now, when Jack sat down with me in the studio, he wrote out the music. It was like, oh, fuck me, he's writing out notes. And it was like, no, that G needs a seventh and an eighth, and it needs to be augmented. And I was like, oh my God, I'm in trouble here. Let me make the tea. But then suddenly he said, I can really appreciate Little Feat and Dylan.
Well, Little Feat were always there. They were one of my building blocks, for sure. Yeah. But Dylan, was always distant for me. But no, there was this time during the 90s, so Wang Chung was over. I'd made an abortive attempt at a solo album, well, abortive in terms of getting it out into the world. And those were my sort of the wilderness years, in a sense, the difficult years. You know, I'd moved out of London. I was living in this sort of countryside house, a farmhouse. Really, it wasn't even in a village. It was like literally a 20-minute drive to the nearest shop. So it was very isolated. Sometimes I think that was a mistake, but of course, life there's never mistakes. It's just what you do. So that's where I was. And I remember getting a call from Jack Hues, and he said, I'm working on this album.
For you to produce something, right?
Yeah. Would you come and... Well, he's actually said, could you come and play a bit of guitar for a couple of days? Which I did. But obviously with Chris, rather like with you, we bond, we talk. And he's like, well, play on this track and do that. And what do you think we should do this?
That's exactly like us.
And actually the writing out of things, something that he really got into, because he sort of say, just write the song out, so I can see the structure. And I'd have this big manuscript paper, like with 30 staves on it or something, and write it all out. And it is useful, especially when you're trying to get oriented in what you're doing, But anyway, so Chris was producing, I was sidekick and generally bringing in, hand chords with 30,000.
I think you were the musical intelligence around the edges.
That's very nice of you to put it that way. Yeah, but bringing in different stuff, But in the evenings he would play albums. It was, in the days when record companies spent money making records, so we had a...
And you listened back, you just laid there.
Well, we were having dinner, and I remember one evening he put on Blonde on Blonde, and it completely, for some reason, blew my mind.
Wow.
I just really got it, and I remember going down to the local...
Why do you think you got it? Why do you think?
I think it was...
Timing in life?
Yeah, it was this sense of like, all that shit that you're interested in. Do you know what I mean? Getting things in time and in tune and precise. It's a waste of time. What you've got to have is the core ideas, and you've got to capture them while they're still burning.
I find this such an important thing to talk about, because I'm an organic writer. I wasn't trained, and Jack was trained, and he went to college. And I found over the years that I would always be looking at Jack because of his sophistication, and where he would take chances. And yet when Jack, over the years we've been together, would look at my normal writing, would say that's a very important place to go. And I think that's interesting, that we've sort of bonded from distant places.
In a sense, certainly different viewpoints of...
And I'm always pushing Jack to do more experimental stuff. Jack, when I play something simple, it's only 4 chords. Jack, he goes, "That's brilliant," and I go, like, "That's interesting. It's interesting over all these years."
Well, it's that tune that you played me this afternoon or this morning.
Little Bird.
But wasn't that was the one before it? I think again that
had Your Whole Heart and To Feel and Courage and
To Feel. I don't know. It's the one that's got 4 chords in it. Anyway,
that would have been Little
4
Bird.
Really.
Most of my
chords.
songs have 4 chords. That's all of the album.
But they have a thing, don't they?
I think I should have called the album 4 chords. That'd have been good, actually.
But I think it's also the enthusiasm for music still, isn't it? And also you get hit by, like getting hit by Blonde on Blonde.
Was it not lyrics? Are you a lyric man?
Partly the lyrics, yeah. That sort of came later with reading books about Dylan and studying the music in more
And
depth.
how do you see lyrics when you write?
Well, in the Wang Chung days, I was pretty whatever works. I was coming from a Beatles place of like the way the lyrics sound is more important than what they mean.
Which I still am. Yeah.
But now I really get what they mean is incredibly important, because you're taking people's time. They're listening. They want to know what you've got to say, and if you're a bit confused about what you're trying to say, it's not good enough.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So, like my latest release, this single that I put out very recently, the lyric I feel is good. You know, and it's, you know, again takes lessons from Dylan in the sense of, you know, the rhymes are, they go on and on and on. You know, you don't just rhyme it once, you rime it twice, 3, 4, 5 times. You know,
you're turning into a normal songwriter. My God!
Yeah, a bit of discipline at last.
Now, your single is called Since 2017.
Yes.
It's about UFOs, and Jack and I are infatuated by the UFO mystery. In fact, when we met together, one of the biggest things we did when we first met in the 80s was to go to a couple of seminars about UFOs and sit there going like, this is real.
So funny.
Remember that? Remember that?
I do.
We went to about 5, you know.
Well, there was one in particular down near the airport in LAX, wasn't it? So
and it was with an engineer.
Yeah.
Jeremy Smith.
Jeremy Smith, yeah, who was massively sceptical. Still is, I'm sure.
And it was Jack and I going like, this is true. Yeah. And then Jeremy's going, you are wankers.
Yeah,
you're
serious. Yeah. But I remember there was that guy, what's his name? Colin
Andrews. That's right.
Who's the crop circle
crop
man.
circles in Wiltshire, near where I lived. Yeah, he was down there, wasn't he? The crop circles
and he was
real.
totally freaked out because his store of, you know, photographs and all his notes and, well, this sort of warehouse where he kept everything had burnt down. And I have to say, you know, I'd be upset as well.
I would be too.
You know, it's a bit like somebody coming in here and torturing you, know, because you're writing songs
that
aren't very good.
But UFOs and this single by Jack, we have to say, is very special. Tell me about it, Jack.
2017, December, is when the New York Times ran an article on what they now call UAPs, this sort of rebranding exercise, which I totally understand. You know, that you've got to call things, you've got to move them out of their cliche world into something else in order to give it some space and some breathing space, you know, and that subject definitely needs that. And anyway, New York Times, December, it was rooted in the news that the Pentagon had changed its tune from, rather than saying that UFOs were, you know, fantasy. They said it's a real phenomena, but we've no idea what it is. You know, so it was a massive change of emphasis.
Yes.
You know, if you're into that subject, it's what you've sort of been waiting for in a way. You know, so the song is, I suppose, a sort of meditation really on where we're at with the subject. About, you know, is it a good thing that it becomes part of our reality, or is it really better to keep it in this kind of fantasy realm? You know, Tom DeLonge, Blink 182. He's a very interesting bloke in all this. You know, a fellow sort of rock star. But it's interesting. You know, he's pretty out there with stuff he talks about and what he's kind of figured out for himself. You know?
Now, one of your press pictures of this single was you with thousands of books.
Yes.
About UFOs.
Not all of them either.
Now, did you read all those?
Yeah. I used to read them like in a day. Those books, I get them.
God.
In those days, you had to buy them in a shop.
Yeah.
But I was pretty aware of, you know, like with rock music, you know, the next album that's coming out, that you want to get it. So
I'm going to ask a question here, though. This is really important because I read something that you had gone to Las Vegas with some of the Wang Chung guys and you'd spoken to some important people.
No, I've never really... Well...
And you've seen some things, sir.
Well, we drove out to Area 51.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was an amazing
And
trip.
you've seen some things?
No, not really.
Okay.
But there was some weirdness,
you
know, and, you know, it's a fascinating subject.
But you believe?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kept your interest.
It has, yeah. But it's like, it's a subject that's not like, you know, when you're sort of reading about it like on X, formerly known as Twitter, you know, people have got this kind of thing, well, prove it to me, you know, where's the proof? And that isn't it. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit like getting into music in a way. Do you know what I mean? I can't prove to you that the Beatles are really important or that Bob Dylan wrote great songs. I can't prove that. Do you know what I mean? And you may well think, I don't really like it. And that's all fine.
Yes.
But when you get into it, you start to sort of get the language, you get the thing, which isn't to say that it's like a culty thing that you have to think a certain way. It's not that at all. But it's there is a sort of absurd side to the UFO subject, which I'd like. You know, just like there's a I'm the Walrus, Lewis Carroll side.
I love that.
To John's thinking.
I love that.
He didn't just write about revolution and
I love that.
social change. You know, he was Lewis Carroll was one of his guys.
Yes.
You know, so you know, it's a complex subject that ebbs and flows,
Yeah.
Quite what the truth is, I don't know. But I think, you and I are both... The thing with music is...
We're the
I've
same.
said this a lot recently.
Yeah.
Music is, in a sense, proof that
Yes.
there's something way beyond everyday life.
Absolutely.
In the way
I
that
think
you
we're talking
relate
about
to each other.
spiritual. Yeah.
Spiritual,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And the UFO thing, again, manifests in this spiritual realm as well, which when you're trying to treat it like a science subject, it sort of falls down with all that stuff. But that doesn't mean that it isn't true.
because you're talking about music, which is intangible, and we can't touch it.
Yeah.
It's in the air.
Yeah.
And so there is more to this. I mean, a melody that touches somebody, or a mood that touches somebody. What is that? That is the spirit. So I believe what you were saying there too. I think there is more to this than we ever would believe. Now, you wrote this single in E flat for a guitarist, an alien key. What made you do that?
I'm always looking for, the unusual thing.
No guitarist can play an E flat.
None of us can. No. For those of you who are wondering what we're talking about, it's hard to explain. It's easier to play on a guitar if you can use your open strings.
Absolutely.
Isn't it? And when you start going to flat keys, they get eaten up very quickly.
Yeah.
So, E flat is not easy on guitar, but I'm found this sort of called this arpeggio thing, this structure of notes that works using open strings but still in E flat, and it's only later that I started thinking so E flat's a sort of alien key.
So a G was ringing there.
Yeah, and there's a sort of E natural as well.
Wow, an E natural.
Because it's a Jack chord, it's got too many notes.
You're talking organic hymns here. This is pagan.
You're talking
pagan.
Flat ninth, baby. Give me a flat ninth.
You don't hear that much. Bang. Give me a flat ninth. Now, do you ever write political songs? I know on one of your albums you wrote "We Can Work Together," or
we've got to work together.
We've got to work together.
Yeah, that was pretty political. That was during the pandemic.
Yeah,
and I sort of.
You felt that strongly at that point.
Well, I think I put out Primitive. Yeah. And I was on the verge of doing a bunch of gigs, and the world shut down. I never got to do that, and so it was kind of like, what do I do now? And then so there was this sense of, we'll just write another album. Do you know what I mean? All this time,
work at home.
I was living on my own completely, and so I did have a lot of time. And I, for some reason, just went back to this riff. I sort of record things on my iPhone on this.
It's a great riff. It's a great riff.
Yeah, and I thought, let's do that, And also, I was in touch with a wonderful singer called Baby Salah.
Right.
And I could just hear this. You sort of heard the riff, heard her voice, heard the sense of let's do sort of.
It's funky.
Give me shelter.
Yeah.
And so I worked on that and sent the track to her, and a friend of hers recorded her vocals, in his little studio. They did it within the restrictions, and she sent all the vocals to me, and I put it in the track and built it up.
Yeah.
And
it's a great track.
Yeah, I love that track. Yeah. And then a friend of mine,
funk rock.
Yeah, he did a great video for it using footage of all the sort of Black Lives Matter demonstrations, and I mean it was a heavy time.
How did you deal with that? I hid away like a hermit. I'm okay with hiding away and being a hermit, but you're an active kind of guy. So how did you deal with that?
I think it threw me back on myself.
Yeah.
And again, I think for the first time in my life, really, I was alone. And that, instead of finding it terrifying, which I did to begin with,
which I would have felt.
I started to relish it. And at this point in my life, all these books that I've read bits of, I can read the whole thing, and I remember listening to audiobooks quite a lot because my eyes were getting tired working on the screen all the time.
Right.
And I listened to an audiobook about Wordsworth, and
wow, I'm reading a book about him now called The Hidden Life of Wordsworth.
Very interesting. Similar thing,
And you're a huge, we have to say here, book reader.
Yes, read a lot. Always got books on the go.
Oh boy, so this question is going to be really important.
Okay.
You know what's coming. Now, were you ever tempted by groupies and drugs? How did you deal with all this through this period?
Yeah, not drugs.
Not drugs. So you kept away from the drugs.
Yeah, because I went
groupies.
We'll get to that. So I went to university and did a degree in music, and then I got a place at the Royal College of Music doing a sort of postgraduate thing in composition. And at that time I moved in with my mate Ron. We were friends from Gillingham. Ron was like a sort of year older than me, but he had amazing artist, painter, with that sort of visceral skill. You could sit here with a biro and a bit of paper and sketch you
straight away,
like in an uncanny likeness, you know. Very funny guy as well, and really into weed. So I moved in to this sort of squat. Really, we had a room each in this sort of with all these hippies, and I was going to the Royal College of Music, which meant going there like twice a week. You know, so it was very loose, and so I spent a lot of time with Ron, and in a paradoxical sort of way, I spent a lot of time listening to Joe Walsh and Todd Rundgren and Little
Joe
Feet and stuff, you know,
God.
Rather than
that's my world.
Stockhausen, which I should have been listening to really. And Ron was really into
what a good balance,
American
though.
music. It was great.
What a great balance.
Yeah. And I was also listening to Berio, Stockhausen, Boulez, you know, through and I was being encouraged to write in that sort of like avant-garde way. And I was smoking a lot of weed, and you know, we did a bit of acid as well.
How old were you? How old?
21.
Okay.
But what I found with drugs is that I didn't really like them. I found them, it took too much time, you know, doing drugs. You lost days, you know, and felt exhausted afterwards. I didn't find it particularly creative as a process. And I didn't like losing myself, if you know what I mean. And so
they came down to groupies.
Rather long-winded way of saying I was over drugs by the time I got, you know,
so you were over drugs by 22, 23.
Yeah, I was. I never really did it after that. So I did have this sense of like, you can't fuck about now. Do you know what I mean? You've got 3 kids.
You've got to be disciplined.
This is it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, this is the game you've got to play. It's like, mate, write a fucking hit. So that was it.
Get down to it, my lad.
Yeah, exactly.
But on the big tours, that happened during Everybody Has Fun Tonight.
Yeah, and Dancehall Days.
Dancehall Days. Yeah. How did you deal with all the temptations?
Yeah, well, having 3 kids was one of the ways of dealing with it, you know, because it's like you can't.
That's healthy.
Dick around, really.
That's really healthy.
It isn't to say that there were some.
You must have turned it
beautiful
down.
girls who came into realms, you know, and I wasn't a saint exactly, but
I don't think anybody's asked you this question before.
No.
So I'm able to, because I'm your mate, and I'm washing his clothes.
And I can talk about
if I'm washing his clothes, I can ask him some really tough questions.
I think we're just having a conversation. It's not going to be broadcast all over the world. And as far as the groupies go, you know, it was.
There's a lot of silence there. We'll just move on from that.
You know, I mean, if there's anything that I know about you, Martin puts this big front on. He's one of the lads, but
I've never been with a groupie ever. Go.
Of course, he hasn't.
I never use auto-tune. Never.
Which is the same thing in your mind, isn't
it? Now, moving on, I've got a few notes here that I have to ask my Now I know that Jack was with thousands of groupies through the 80s and 90s. Yeah. I look at him differently. Yeah. And I'm looking at him now across the microphone going like, you whore from Wang Chung, you whore. What do you do in your free time?
Now, free time. Well, my kids, you know, who are now...
Now tell me about your kids. You got very successful kids.
They're wonderful.
Yeah.
Harry, Jack and Violet. So Harry's my oldest son. He, with his partner, Simona, runs a very wonderful Italian restaurant in Margate. Margate's a little seaside town.
And you did a video in Margate, right?
Yeah. And some of Primitif, you know, I was travelling to Margate.
That's a big town.
A lot, Margate train. And but they've got this great Italian restaurant, and it's not like spaghetti bolognese and garlic bread. It's southern Italian cooking. Simona basically cooks her grandmother's recipes. I just feel like I'm doing an advert for them.
I'm getting hungry.
But if you're ever over in the UK, it's an amazing.
Your hand changed then. Yeah. Jack moved towards you with his hand. It was Italian.
I suddenly went Italian. And and I love that influence. You know, I've got my grandson Raphael, who's 8.5, who speaks fluent Italian as well as English. You know, it was great. I was in Milan a few years ago, before the pandemic, when Violet was there. My daughter, she's an actress, or an actor, we say these days, in a play in Milan, and I remember sort of spent a week with her, I think, you know, and I was getting this cab. I wanted to get the cab from the hotel to the bus station, take the bus to the airport. And this lovely Italian cab driver, and he said, I got in and I said, want to go to the bus station? He goes, where do you really want to go? And I said, well, I'm going to the airport. He goes, I drive you to the airport. So when we started talking and I said about Raphael, he goes, Raphael's half Italian, so you're half Italian. And I sort of have this fantasy, I'm half Italian. I do have some style. So that's Harry and Simona, and then my son Jack, he's an actor.
And a very handsome man.
Very handsome. He became very successful when he was young in a soap in the UK called EastEnders.
Yeah.
And became like a household name.
He looks like you. He looks like you.
That's nice of you to say. I hope he thinks
no, he
that
does.
too.
Yeah, he does look like you. Yeah.
No, he's great. And he has a little daughter called Marnie, who's gorgeous. She's 3. And Harry and Simona have Raphael, who's 8, and also a daughter called Artemisia, who's also 3.
Great name.
Yeah.
What a great name.
Marnie and Artemisia.
You must be so proud.
I am. And then my daughter Violet had a granddaughter, her daughter, in January of this year. So I have 4 grandchildren.
You're not alone. I mean, really, that is a wonderful, wonderful family.
It's amazing, And spending time with those guys is just joy. What do I do in my free time? That's one of the things I love to do. I mean, I don't spend enough time with them, but that's one
that must fill you with so much sense of going back to England and touching them after you've done a tour or whatever, and you're writing. You always feel that this family of love is there.
Indeed, yeah. I'm incredibly fortunate to have had the career in the music business that I've had, and to have kept my feet sufficiently on the ground, to have a good relationship with my kids, and hopefully, I know with Raphael we're very close, but hopefully the girls, as they grow up and get a little older, will also be able to.
Do you find that they influence you at all with your writing?
Oh, well, hugely. You learn from children. I always felt with my own children, I learned a huge amount from them. Just watching them and how they grappled with the world. Even from when they were very little. So,
Did you always want a family?
I sort of did, actually. Yeah. Even though
because you started early.
Young.
You started early.
It was. I guess you could say it wasn't planned exactly, but I had got to a point in my life where I sort of felt. Having children is that sort of loving bond that you can't replicate with another person in a sense, So obviously they're different things, and now I've been through a lot, and I've had some very important relationships, and so I get that the bond of love, as it were, is a very powerful thing, and the way you relate to people of your own age and so on. Is
and would you say you were happy now?
I think I can say that I am. Yeah,
that's a wonderful thing to say.
Great episode of Frasier, isn't there, where they keep asking Frasier, "But are you happy?" And he keeps changing the subject.
No. But
I can answer that.
Your gut feeling is this is contentment.
Yes, it's a good point in my life. I mean, we were talking earlier about loss. And I've lost some very dear people. My wife Mel passed away in 2014. Ron, my dear friend, passed away 2 years ago. My parents, my mum died a couple of years ago. So I've been through. I think 2014, maybe 2012 to 22 was a 10-year period of dealing with death.
And I was always myself quite dominated by grief and depression, and I always wondered, because Jack was so positive, when I mentioned to him a philosopher like Schopenhauer, I said, how do you feel about that? And he'd say, too down, no, too pessimistic. So when Jack went through some of these things, it really, as a brother, hit me, and I was interested how he put that into his music. And I think on Primitive you distinctly put that grief, although it also touched your next album, but Primitive really reflected you. To me, the nearest that I would put into my songs, from the Temple of the Muse and the House of Stone and Light, I felt like Jack was touching also that spiritual, soulful place, which I could actually connect with as well. Am I true in saying that?
Yes. Yes.
It was different for you, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, grieving is a whole continent, isn't it? And I've been very fortunate to not have had to have dealt with it until fairly late in my life. But then again, I think music. Again, a lot of music is about death, really, especially classical stuff. Because it's written in a world where death was much more present than it is in our world.
Totally feel that.
When you're listening to Schubert, especially, Mahler. You know, it's infused with grief and loss. You know, and that's the access to a sort of very special kind of beauty is through that.
Yes. You know? Do you think you hear that in the Beatles at a certain point when you? Do you think the Beatles around that period of Let It Be, Long and Winding Road? Do you think that they were reflecting that at all?
I do. Yeah. I mean, they have a very, because some people just hear the Beatles as a sort of pop group. You know, but I had never heard that because of the level. And me. Even Please Please Me, I mean, which is like a pop song, but because of that da 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 da, and that other note that goes da 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 da, the harmony, it's kind of jarring in places, and that is bittersweet.
There's a slight beauty of darkness.
It is, and it's also this expanded consciousness of what's possible within the framework of a pop song.
So you're working on some new stuff now.
Yeah. I had a burst of energy at the beginning of the year, and
Not another album, right? Another album?
Afraid so.
After the Wang Chung tour, another album?
Yeah, another proggy album. Yeah. Well, I've probably spent my life trying to get to where you are, you know, with the heart. No, really, you know, it's like with Primitive, I think, you know, it sort of gets there.
It does. It's pure expression. So, Jack, tell me about your jazz influences, because when you came across to LA quite recently, I gave you a book about John McLaughlin and the Mahavishnu Orchestra.
I love that book. So as a guitar player, John McLaughlin is like, I remember listening to him when I was a kid thinking, I'm never going to be able to get anywhere close to this. So I'll just stick with Joe Strummer, basically. But I've always admired it. You know, jazz is a weird thing, and the whole area of being trained in music, you know. I always resist the idea that I was a trained musician, but of course I was trained, you know. But so sometimes I can feel that kind of ability to be able to sort of, as it were, churn out the music. It's not there. It's not churning it out. That skill sort of thing, in a sense, creates a sort of comfortable layer of interface between you and your instrument and what comes out. And it's fundamentally not very interesting, other than to people who are just big fans and like that. So I love McLaughlin when he's playing with Miles Davis, and I love, you know, the story about In a Silent Way, where he's sort of like, you know, it's his first gig with Miles, and he's in the studio and they're doing this Joe Zawinul composition called In a Silent Way. And Joe's written this song, which, if you're into Miles, you can buy these box sets where you get the original versions, you know. And so Joe's original version is a sort of bossa nova, fairly horrendous composition with lots of chords and quite schmaltzy kind of, you know, sort of hotel bar kind of piece, you know. And so they've obviously had a go at playing that, you know, and presumably McLaughlin's got the jots in front of him, and then Miles stops them and goes, okay. And he goes up to McLaughlin and goes, you started, play the guitar like you don't know how to play it.
You should do that to me.
And McLaughlin's like, oh, you know, and it's like red lights on, run. Got to basically play this piece that's like probably an E flat. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
No, it's he puts it
key
in
of
E,
death.
but he basically takes all the chords out of it. You know, he's playing that boing, ding, 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 ding. It's a beautiful melody, but Joe's composition sort of harmonises the melody like you or me would do it, sort of thing. Particularly me. And Miles is basically take all the chords out, just play the melody, and play it on guitar like you don't know how to play the guitar. And I find all that just fascinating. And I think the sort of rabbit in the headlights sense of a musician like McLaughlin being completely confronted at that point with something that he doesn't know what he's doing, that brings out genius. You know? And the way that whole front section of In a Silent Way evolves, you know, Miles plays it and then Wayne Shorter joins them. It is totally magical, and that's caught in a totally spontaneous way.
That's amazing. And now, over your growth as a singer and a songwriter, over the years you've actually encompassed being more loose with your vocals. Because when I worked with Jack, I put him on the mic and I go, oh my God, I'm dealing with Sting here. His tuning is so precision and he's so on it. Everything he did, again, double this straight in. Now I feel that you're singing purely from what you feel, and if it's not technically right, it's speaking from another level.
Exactly right. I mean, this is what you learn from Miles Davis and Bob Dylan. You know, they seem like they're very different sorts of artists, but in fact they're very similar, you know, in their approach. There's a great book on Dylan called The Double Life of Bob Dylan, where the Clinton Halin, I think is the writer, tries to get into what Dylan was doing when he was recording some of those amazing albums, the pre-Blonde on Blonde records, but particularly Blonde on Blonde, and how the musicians, Dylan would come into the studio, he'd have the tape running sort of thing, and he'd start playing the song, but he never told them what the chords were, or and these are session musicians who've been working on Frank Sinatra's record the morning before, and so he's deliberately fucking with them basically, and trying to get them into that place where they're not sure what they're doing, and in that space is where you get that spontaneity, Now, obviously, there's musics that are appropriate to that, and I suppose the jazz thing is that, really. It's like, that's what blew me away about jazz. It wasn't the virtuosity and the 1,000 notes per second. It was that you could write the composition on the back of an envelope.
Right.
And then it's like you play that, that's the starting point, and then you just be brilliant. And as a composer, you sort of get out of the way as much as you can, which is very different from the rock classical
Absolutely.
Where you're telling people what to do all the time. Spontaneity, though, is the Epigonal Quark, my last live jazz album. There's a solo that I do on the live version of Nobody's Fault But My Own, which I love.
Good,
and it's kind of and what I love about it is that I have no idea how I did it. I couldn't do it now. Do you know what I mean? It's not like I planned it. It's not like I sort of knew what I was going to do before I started. And it's kind of me working with the guitar and also the delay pedal and kind of bouncing off. It's what I love about Hendrix's playing. People go about his virtuosity and stuff, and all of that's great, and he's got a virtuosity. But what he was brilliant at was reacting to the sound of the guitar as it's happening and altering his playing off of that. I mean, you hear that with Thelonious Monk in his playing as well. He'll play a phrase, he'll land on not quite the note you imagine, or it takes him off in another direction. And it's like, it's that ability as a musician to be able to react to the precise second that you're in and adapt to your thinking, you're playing into that. And opportunities for that are few and far between in many ways in rock music, but in jazz it's much more available.
Now, I wanted to ask you this for the longest time, because your middle eights and the bridges are incredible. Your washing's done, actually, Jack. We've done your washing. Washing's
I'll be
ready.
off then.
Session's over. I'll see you later. Give me a call from England. Your middle eights, your bridges. Now, Americans would say bridges. We say middle eights.
Yes.
How do you see middle eights, bridges? But your middle eights are exceptional. Do you concentrate on them?
Yes. I mean,
do they seem important to you? That there must be like a verse and a bridge and a middle eight?
Yes. But not essential. And what I love about your new record is that you do dispense.
There's not many.
There's not a middle eight in sight.
See, he noticed it. I didn't notice that. He noticed it because it's all feel.
Absolutely. But Paul Simon summed it up very well when he said, I'll write a song, and then for the middle eight, I'll just look at all the chords I've got and choose one that I haven't got.
It's not there. I do that. I've done that.
So that's essentially what you do with the middle eight, and certainly what. Well, I guess with Everybody Have Fun Tonight.
I mean, the range of that, it goes through the roof. How do you sing that live? So you go down a fourth or something, but
something
you do
like that,
you do move it around.
It's a bit of a sleight of hand.
That is so hard.
The first time I sang it live was on the Joan Rivers show in front of 30 million people or something.
Oh my God.
The pressure, and the band was mine as well. God. So the band's all just like sitting around with nothing plugged in, all kind of, do you know what musicians are like?
Oh my God.
And I was just like bricking it. Sort of, how am I going to get through this? Because I'd never sung it live at all, But I nailed it.
You hit it.
Because
you nailed it.
I'm Jack fucking Hues.
You're Jack fucking Hues. So, what's your favourite Wang Chung record that you made?
To Live and Die in LA is, I think, a good mix of our sort of American influences. We were in a difficult place when we did that record.
Geffen Records.
Yeah, Geffen Records. We were we'd done Points on the Curve.
Yeah.
Had a hit with Dance for Days, a proper hit, but it wasn't a number one hit. And it was kind of like, okay, boys, number one record, you've got to distill what you do into 3 minutes. And I was writing all this stuff, which I thought was good, but it's way too arty, And then out of the blue, Freakin' asked us to do the score. So it let us off the hook. And To Live and Die in LA is a very expanded kind of song. Do you know what I mean? It's
beautiful.
It's a beautiful song. I'm very proud of that song, And I think with To Live and Die, Nick and I produced it ourselves, effectively, and worked with an engineer, David Motion. But there was none of that kind of like, you got to do this, or you got to have a something quirky or something. We just did what we did.
Yeah.
And as such, I think it stands up well.
Yes. So the future, that's the question, the future.
I see next year another Wang Chung year for me. It's been a Wang Chung year this year, and the plan is to put out a greatest hits album in early next year, which is going to have the greatest hits on it. It's going to be a double vinyl album, and the second vinyl album will have deep cuts from the upcoming sort of anthology that we're going to release. It's not an anthology really, it's releasing each of the 6 studio albums that we did with all of the outtakes and all the songs we didn't do, and you know, like very kind of exhaustively everything we did and everything you never realised we did.
So are you going to tour with me when I go out on the road?
Yeah, I want to be in your band, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be cleaning your clothes.
God, you need a bit of funk in that band.
I can't tell you, Jack, how great it is to wash your clothes. It's so beautiful to be with you.
It's weird, actually, that we could just lock straight into being mates again.
I know.
It's like you live around the corner. You know.
I wish Jack lived in LA with me. But Jack, thank you so much, and I think we've learnt a lot today.
I hope so.
And a handshake to you.
We're shaking hands.
$35 for washing your clothes. Lots of love to everybody, and thank you, Jack.
No, thank you, Martin.
We will see you soon again. Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Well, there we are. What a wonderful, wonderful interview with Mr. Hues. It was so brilliant to have him here. And as you can hear, the washing machine was in the background, making its presence known. And I think of that as analog tape noise. So I hope you did as well. I've got to say that Jack played me a couple of new tracks before he left the studio of his new album in progress. And it was, yes, as we would expect, exceptional. So you've all got something to look forward to in the future. Thank you for joining me and Jack on the first ever Going Down the Rabbit Hole with Martin Page. May there be many more, hopefully. Gotta say again, thank you to the great Jack Hues for stopping by my studio and listening to his guitar parts on my upcoming new album. And for being brave and going down the rabbit hole with Pagey. That takes guts. Look after all the innocent animals out there, stay positive and keep listening to good music. See you soon. Pagey.